He was born in the dust of the desert, under a cloth roof that flapped in the hot Libyan wind. His parents were poor Bedouin herders who owned almost nothing but their animals and their pride. They could not have imagined that their skinny son, who ran barefoot across the sand and memorized verses from the Quran by lamplight, would one day rule an entire country. His name was Muammar Gaddafi, and for more than 4 decades he would stand at the center of Libya's fate. Adored, feared, mocked, hated, but never ignored. He rose from obscurity as a young officer in a forgotten corner of the Arab world. In 1969, at just 27 years old, he helped topple a sleepy monarchy and declared the birth of a new republic. He promised to give Libya back to its people, to throw out foreign bases, to seize control of the oil that lay beneath the desert and use it to build schools, hospitals, and homes. He wrote his own political theory, printed it in a thin green book, and tried to reshape a nation in its image. Under his rule, Libya tasted rapid modernization and heavy repression. Roads, universities, and gleaming new districts appeared where there had been only sand and poverty. At the same time, secret prisons filled with men who spoke too loudly or organized too openly. Abroad, Gaddafi funded rebels, guerrillas, and radical cousins, turning Libya into both a champion for some and a villain for others. Western governments called him a sponsor of terror. Many in Africa called him brother and benefactor. In his later years, the desert colonel exchanged isolation for fragile friendship with the very powers he had once attacked. He welcomed presidents and prime ministers into his tent, shook hands on new deals, and tried to step back onto the world stage as a partner instead of an enemy. But when the winds of the Arab Spring reached Libya, they blew straight through his carefully built system. Protests ignited into rebellion, rebellion slid into civil war, and the man who had once felt invincible faced the fury of his own people. This is the story of Muammar Gaddafi, from a tent near Sirte to the palaces of Tripoli, from revolutionary firebrand to aging autocrat, from the heights of power to a bloody end in a drainage ditch on the edge of his hometown. Muammar Gaddafi was born on June 7, 1942, near the coastal town of Sirte in central Libya. His family belonged to the Gaddafi tribe, a Bedouin group that moved with the seasons, tending their flocks and living in simple tents. They were poor in money but rich in memory. At night, around the fire, adults told stories of past battles, of colonial oppression, of resistance and humiliation. These stories sank deep into the mind of the young boy who listened more than he spoke. Libya at that time was only beginning to emerge from the shadow of Italian colonial rule and the devastation of World War I. The country was damaged, thin, and fragile. When it became an independent kingdom in 1951 under King Idris, the state was more promising idea than solid reality. Many Libyans still lived in tents or mud houses. Roads were few. Schools were scarce. Foreign powers still held bases and influence. Gaddafi's childhood was shaped by this harsh mix of poverty, pride, and resentment. His first structured education came through religion. He attended a small Quranic school, learning to recite verses, absorbing the rhythms of classical Arabic and the moral language of right and wrong, justice and injustice. When he later entered primary school in Sirte, he felt the gap between his Bedouin background and the more settled town life. He wore simple clothes and carried the dust of the desert with him, but he studied hard and quickly stood out as serious, intense, and ambitious. As a teenager, he moved to the town of Sabha in Libya's south to continue his education. There, in a crowded dormitory and dusty classrooms, he encountered the broader Arab world through radio. Each evening, he and other students gathered around a radio tuned to Cairo. The voice they listened for belonged to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, the champion of Arab nationalism. Nasser spoke of unity, independence, and resistance to Western dominance. For Gaddafi, these broadcasts were like a revelation. He began to idolize Nasser, collecting his speeches, pictures, and slogans. Nasser's overthrow of Egypt's King Farouk in 1950 by a group of young officers made a powerful impression. It showed that kings could fall, and that uniforms could move history. In school, Gaddafi formed a small circle of like-minded students who discussed politics, colonialism, and the dream of a united Arab nation. Their meetings were simple and secretive, held in dorm rooms and quiet corners, but their ideas were bold. His activism did not go unnoticed. School authorities and security officers kept an eye on students who seemed interested in politics. Gaddafi's refusal to stay quiet eventually led to disciplinary trouble. He was expelled from the school in Sabha because he would not stop spreading his ideas. Rather than break him, this experience hardened his resolve. He became even more certain that change would never come through petitions or polite requests. It would come, he believed, through force. He decided to become a soldier. In the early 1960s, he entered the Royal Military Academy in Benghazi. The academy was a place where young men from different parts of Libya learned discipline, tactics, and loyalty to the monarchy. For Gaddafi, it was also a perfect environment to study how power worked from the inside. He learned how armies were organized, how communication lines could be cut, how governments depended on barracks and tanks and airfields. At the same time, he quietly recruited others to his cause, among trusted friends. He formed a secret group of officers inspired by Nasser's free officers in Egypt. They were united by anger at King Idris' government, which they viewed as corrupt, slow, and closed to Western powers. They saw the king spending long periods outside Libya, while foreign companies controlled the young country's most valuable resource. Oil, newly discovered in large quantities beneath the desert. The officers met in small apartments and barracks rooms, whispering over maps and plans, waiting for their moment. Outside the world of uniforms, Libya was beginning to change. Oil exploration had started in the late 1950s, and by the early 1960s, production was rising quickly. Pipelines cut across the desert. Refineries and terminals appeared along the coast. Money began to pour into the state budget, but the distribution of this wealth was uneven. While a small elite grew richer, many rural families saw little improvement. Gaddafi and his circle regarded this as proof that the monarchy was failing its people. By the late 1960s, King Idris was old and in poor health. He spent more time abroad, and his government seemed tired and disconnected. Discontent simmered quietly in the army and among young urban Libyans. In this atmosphere, Gaddafi and his fellow conspirators believed the time for action was approaching. They developed a plan that relied on speed and surprise, not mass violence. Their aim was to seize key institutions in a single night and present the country with a fait accompli by morning. The night of August 31st to September 1st, 1969 finally brought their chance. King Idris was out of the country for medical treatment. In the dark hours before dawn, units led by the young officers moved into position. Tanks and armored cars rolled toward radio stations, military headquarters, and government buildings in Tripoli and Benghazi. There was confusion, but little resistance. Many officers loyal to the king were caught off guard, outmaneuvered before they had time to react. When the sun rose over Libya on September 1st, the monarchy had effectively fallen. On the radio, a statement announced the end of the old regime and the birth of the Libyan Arab Republic. The voice behind the revolution belonged to a 27-year-old captain, Muammar Gaddafi. He appeared later on television, tall, with sharp features, serious eyes, and a uniform that seemed almost too big for him. He spoke of justice, dignity, and a new era for Libya. The coup was almost bloodless, which gave it an aura of legitimacy in the eyes of many Libyans. The new rulers, calling themselves the Revolutionary Command Council, promised to return power and wealth to the people. They spoke of abolishing backwardness, ending foreign dependence, and building a modern, proud state. For ordinary Libyans who had only known poverty, colonial domination, and a distant king, these words were intoxicating. Hopes ran high. In the early years of his rule, Gaddafi focused on radical change at home. He expelled foreign military bases, insisting that Libya would no longer serve as a platform for other countries' power. He renegotiated oil concessions, increasing Libya's share of profits and asserting greater control over its own resources. The state used rising using oil revenues to fund ambitious development projects. New roads, housing complexes, schools, universities, and hospitals. For many Libyans, life did improve. Education became free and more widely available. Access to healthcare expanded. Large apartment blocks rose on the edges of cities, replacing some of the slums and tents. The government offered subsidized food and fuel. In the countryside, projects aimed to bring water to dry lands and provide modern services to remote communities. The young colonel liked to present himself as the father of these changes, the man who was using oil money to lift his people from misery. But Gaddafi wanted more than economic reform. He wanted to develop an entirely new political model. Rejecting both Western capitalism and Soviet-style communism, he claimed to have created a third path, which he called the Third International Theory. Its core ideas were laid out in his Green Book, a work in which he attacked conventional parliaments and parties as tools of exploitation. He argued that true democracy meant the direct exercise of power by the people, through popular congresses and committees. In theory, this system would put every citizen at the center of decision-making. In practice, the Jamahiriya, or state of the masses, was built on a paradox. While Gaddafi declared that he held no official title except brother leader and guide of the revolution, real power remained tightly concentrated in his hands and in the hands of trusted associates. Popular congresses met and debated, but security services watched them carefully, and decisions that touched on the core of the regime rarely came from below. As the new system took shape, space for opposition shrank. Gaddafi viewed dissent not as a normal part of political life, but as a direct threat to the revolution. Critics within the army and the bureaucracy were removed, exiled, or jailed. Prisons such as Abu Salam became infamous as places where political prisoners disappeared for years, sometimes forever. Public executions were broadcast on television, sending a clear message to anyone considering resistance. The price of disloyalty would be high. While he consolidated power at home, Gaddafi looked outward with grand ambition. He saw himself as the natural successor to Nasser as leader of the Arab world. Libya, though small in population, was rich in oil and strategically located. He believed it could play a much larger role in regional politics. He pushed for unity projects and proposed various unions with neighboring Arab states, including Egypt and Syria. Most of these experiments were short-lived or never fully implemented, but they reflected the scale of his aspiration. When Egypt's president Anwar Sadat signed a peace treaty with Israel at Camp David, Gaddafi denounced him fiercely. To Gaddafi, the agreement was a betrayal of the Palestinian cause and a surrender to Western pressure. Relations between Libya and Egypt deteriorated rapidly, culminating in a brief but violent clash along their shared border in 1977. The conflict ended quickly, but it left deep bitterness and highlighted Gaddafi's readiness to confront even fellow Arab leaders. At the same time, he began to support a wide range of revolutionary and militant movements across the globe. Libya gave money, weapons, and training to groups that opposed colonialism, Western influence, or existing regimes. These included Palestinian factions fighting Israel, African liberation movements struggling against white minority rule, and groups active in Europe and elsewhere. Gaddafi liked to present himself as a champion of the oppressed, a leader who turned oil wealth into ammunition for global revolution. However, this strategy came with a heavy cost. Western intelligence agencies tracked Libyan support for groups involved in bombings, hijackings, and attacks. As the decade progressed, Libya's name appeared repeatedly in connection with violent incidents. The United States and several European countries began to see Gaddafi not just as a difficult ruler, but as a direct security threat. The relationship between Libya and the West slid toward open hostility. The tension exploded in the mid-1980s, after a bomb in a Berlin discotheque frequented by American soldiers killed and wounded multiple people. The United States blamed Libya. In April 1986, American aircraft launched airstrikes on targets in Tripoli and Benghazi. Bombs struck military facilities and areas associated with the regime. Gaddafi survived, but members of his family were reported reportedly killed, including an adopted daughter. The attack reinforced his image among his supporters as a leader who dared to stand up to a superpower and survived its wrath. Yet, from the perspective of the West, the story was far from over. In December 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all passengers and crew as well as people on the ground. Investigators eventually pointed to Libyan intelligence officers as responsible for placing the bomb on the aircraft. Not long after, a French passenger plane, UTA Flight 772, was destroyed by a bomb over the Sahara, killing everyone on board. Again, Libyan officials were accused of involvement. These tragedies had enormous diplomatic consequences. The United Nations imposed sanctions on Libya. Foreign assets were frozen. Flights in and out of the country were restricted. The Libyan economy experienced serious strain. While all revenues continued, the combination of sanctions, isolation, and mismanagement limited growth and investment. Libyans found it increasingly difficult to travel or trade, and many modern goods became scarce or expensive. Inside the country, Gaddafi responded by doubling down on control. He presented Libya as a fortress under siege, surrounded by enemies who wanted to steal its independence and all. In this narrative, any internal opposition could be portrayed as treason, a helping hand to foreign conspirators. Security forces intensified their surveillance of universities, mosques, and workplaces. Dissidents abroad were tracked, threatened, and in some cases assassinated. Fear became an everyday presence. Yet even in this period of isolation, the picture inside Libya was not simple. Many citizens remembered how poor their communities had once been and recognized that education and healthcare had improved. Some admired Gaddafi for his defiance, for refusing to bow to the demands of powerful states. Others stayed silent out of caution, focusing on their families and were trying to live decent lives in the shadow of the regime. The country floated between pride and pressure, progress and paralysis. As the 1990s unfolded, global politics shifted dramatically. The Cold War ended. Old alliances and certainties dissolved. The Soviet Union, once an important counterweight to Western power, disappeared. For leaders like Gaddafi, who had spent years playing East against West, the New World Order was more dangerous and less predictable. At the same time, the burden of sanctions grew heavier. Young Libyans saw that their peers in other countries had more chances to study abroad, start businesses, and travel. Gradually, the Libyan leadership began to reconsider its course. In 1999, after long negotiations, Libya handed over to intelligence officers to be tried in connection with the Lockerbie bombing. This gesture opened the door to limited easing of sanctions. A more dramatic change came in 2003, when Gaddafi announced that Libya would abandon its programs to develop weapons of mass destruction and allow international inspectors into the country. This move surprised many observers around the world. The decision marked a turning point. Within a few years, most international sanctions were lifted. Western oil companies returned to Libya, signing new contracts and restarting projects. Foreign leaders who had once refused to shake Gaddafi's hand now traveled to Tripoli to meet him. One by one, European presidents and prime ministers visited his tent, signed deals, and spoke of a new relationship. Gaddafi, in his 70s, appeared to have re-entered the global stage not as a pariah, but as a partner. He traveled abroad more often, sometimes pitching his tent on the grounds of luxury hotels during state visits. He spoke at the United Nations General Assembly, delivering long, rambling speeches that mixed grievances, historical reflections, and his own theories. He continued to dress in distinctive outfits, ornate uniforms, flowing robes, and bright sashes. Foreign media alternated between treating him as a curiosity and as a symbol of a changing Middle East. At home, talk of reform grew louder. One of his sons, Saif al-Islam, presented himself as a modernizer, speaking of human rights, transparency, and the need for a constitution. Some political prisoners were released. Private business gained more space. Shopping malls, new hotels, and construction projects appeared in major cities. Tripoli and Benghazi, once sleepy and gray, began to look more vibrant and connected to the outside world. But beneath the surface, surface, fundamental structures remained unchanged. There were still no genuine elections that could threaten the ruling family's grip on power. Independent media were limited. Critical voices risked harassment or worse. The security apparatus that had grown in the 1970s and 1980s still existed, still watching. The state and the Gaddafi family were deeply intertwined. Power was distributed not through clear institutions, but through networks of loyalty, money, and fear. By the end of the 2000s, Libya was a strange mix of modernity and stagnation. On one side, satellite dishes, luxury cars, and mobile phones had become common. On the other, young graduates struggled to find meaningful jobs outside the bloated public sector. Corruption and favoritism frustrated those who lacked connections. Beneath the calm surface of official propaganda and carefully staged rallies, discontent simmered quietly among parts of the population, especially in areas that felt neglected or marginalized. In late 2010, a spark appeared far from Libya's borders. In Tunisia, a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in protest against humiliation by local authorities. His death triggered protests that rapidly grew into a nationwide movement. Within weeks, Tunisia's long-standing president fell. The wave of unrest jumped to Egypt, where mass demonstrations filled Cairo's Tahrir Square and led to the downfall of President Hosni Mubarak. The Arab world was entering a season of uprisings that would come to be known as the Arab Spring. In Libya, people watched these events with a mix of hope, surprise, and uncertainty. If Tunisians and Egyptians could challenge their rulers, perhaps Libyans could too. In February 2011, protests broke out in Benghazi, a city in the east that had long been both important and restive. Demonstrators demanded an end to corruption, more freedoms, and in some cases the fall of the regime itself. The authorities responded with force. Clashes between security forces and protesters escalated quickly. Funerals for those killed in the first confrontations turned into larger demonstrations. Some units of the army and police refused to fire on crowds and switched sides. Weapons were seized from depots. Within days, the situation had shifted from unrest to open rebellion in parts of the country. Cities in the east fell out of the regime's control and raised the flag of the old monarchy as a symbol of rejection of Gaddafi's rule. Gaddafi appeared on television to deliver angry, defiant speeches. He called the protesters rats and traitors, claimed they were drugged or manipulated by foreign enemies, and promised to fight to the last drop of blood. He insisted that he was still beloved by the majority of Libyans, and that only a small minority wanted chaos. His tone was both threatening and disconnected from the reality unfolding in the streets. Rather than calm the situation, his words seemed to harden the resolve of his opponents. The conflict rapidly turned into a civil war. In the east, a national transitional council was formed in Benghazi, claiming to represent the revolution and the future of Libya. In the west, cities such as Misrata rose up, facing heavy attacks from regime forces. Gaddafi's troops used tanks, artillery, and air power against rebel-held areas. Reports of civilian casualties and harsh reprisals spread. The world watched with growing alarm, especially as Gaddafi's forces advanced toward Benghazi, threatening to crush the uprising in its cradle. In March 2011, the United Nations authorized international action to protect civilians. A coalition of states, led by NATO, began airstrikes against Gaddafi's military assets. Planes targeted tanks, air defenses, and command centers. The intervention changed the balance of the conflict. Gaddafi's forces could no longer move freely, and rebels gained space to regroup, supply themselves, and push forward. The war became a complex struggle involving local militias, defected units, and foreign air power. Over the following months, front lines shifted repeatedly. In the west, the besieged city of Misrata held out under intense bombardment, suffering great destruction but refusing to surrender. In the Nafusa Mountains, communities rose against the regime and slowly pushed toward the capital. In the east, Benghazi remained the nerve center of the rebellion. Gaddafi tried to maintain control of Tripoli and central Libya, relying on loyal brigades, tribal allies, and a propaganda machine that repeated his claims of defending the nation against foreign plots. By August 2011, the pressure on Tripoli became unbearable. Rebel forces from various directions coordinated an offensive, supported by intensified NATO strikes. Inside the capital, networks of underground activists and defected units rose at key moments, attacking symbols of the regime. Battles erupted around strategic sites, including Gaddafi's fortified Bab al-Azizia compound. After days of fighting, the capital fell. The famous green statue in front of the compound was pulled down, and rebels poured into the complex that had once seemed impregnable. Gaddafi himself vanished from public view as Tripoli collapsed. Rumors flew in every direction. Some said he had fled to the vast desert in the south. Others claimed he had gone to friendly tribal regions or that he was hiding in underground bunkers. Audio messages attributed to him circulated, calling on loyalists to keep fighting. But it was clear that his grip on the state was broken. Much of Libya had slipped from his hands. His final refuge lay where his story had begun. Near Sirte, the city and its surroundings became the last major stronghold of the old regime. Loyal fighters, including some of his family members and the remnants of elite units, gathered there. They dug in among apartment blocks and along the roads leading in and out of the city. Rebel forces advanced from both east and west. Sirte quickly turned into a battlefield with heavy shelling, street-to-street fighting, and devastating damage to homes and infrastructure. For Gaddafi, Sirte held deep symbolic meaning. He had once envisioned it as a future capital of his political system, a showpiece city on the Mediterranean coast. Now he moved from one hiding place to another in its shattered neighborhoods, acutely aware that the circle was closing. Each day, rebel units pushed further in, and each day, supplies and safe routes shrank. The man who had once traveled with convoys and retinues now depended on narrow escapes and improvised shelters. On October 20th, 2011, a convoy attempting to break out of Sirte came under heavy attack. Airstrikes and ground fire hit vehicles, causing chaos and destruction. In the confusion, Gaddafi and a small group of loyalists abandoned their damaged cars and sought cover in a drainage pipe by the side of the road. It was a desperate move by a leader who, for decades, had defined himself as the embodiment of the state, now reduced to hiding in a concrete tube beneath a battered highway. Rebel fighters searching the area soon discovered them. Footage recorded on mobile phones captured a scene of fury and disorder. Gaddafi, wounded, his clothes stained with blood and dust, was dragged from the pipe and surrounded by an angry crowd. Shots, blows, and gunshots blurred together. Some fighters wanted to capture him alive, others wanted immediate revenge for years of repression and the bloody war. There was no courtroom, no formal trial, only raw emotion and violence. Within a short time, he was dead. His body was transported to the city of Misrata and displayed in a cold storage facility, where lines of people came to look at the former leader who had dominated their country for 42 years. For some, his death brought a feeling of justice. For others, it raised uneasy questions about the cycle of violence and the absence of due process. Either way, the Gaddafi era was over. But while his life ended abruptly, his legacy did not. Libya, freed from his rule, did not automatically become stable or democratic. Instead, the country entered a long and painful period of fragmentation. Rival militias, local power centers, and competing political visions filled the vacuum left by the collapse of the regime. Institutions that had been hollowed out or tightly controlled under Gaddafi struggled to function. Without a strong center, weapons looted from military depots spread through society and across borders. Looking back, opinions on Muammar Gaddafi remain sharply divided. To those who suffered under his rule, he was a ruthless autocrat who tolerated no dissent, filled prisons, and linked Libya to acts of international terror. They remember the fear of speaking openly, the disappearances, and the heavy hand of the security services. They point to massacres and abuses documented after the revolution, and to the pain of families who never saw their loved ones again. To others, he was a leader who used oil wealth to build a modern state where none had existed before. They recall the free education that allowed children from poor families to attend university, the healthcare system that reached remote areas, and the subsidies that kept basic goods affordable. They highlight his support for African liberation movements, his role in ending apartheid's isolation, and his refusal to simply follow Western orders. In their eyes, his defiance gave Libya a sense of dignity on the world stage. Both perspectives capture parts of the truth. Gaddafi's Libya was a place of real social progress and real fear, of rising living standards and crushed political freedoms. He was a man who dreamed in large, theatrical gestures, of Arab unity, of a single African state, of a new form of democracy written in his own book. Yet he built a system that depended heavily on his personal authority and on networks of loyalty, rather than on durable, transparent institutions. His life traces a striking arc. He began as a poor Bedouin boy, became a revolutionary officer who overthrew a king, turned into a powerful leader who shaped his country with all money and ideology, and ended as a fugitive chased through ruins. Along the way, he fought wars, survived bombings, funded struggles abroad, and tried to reinvent himself more than once. He saw himself as a guide, perhaps even as a historic figure whose ideas would outlive him. In reality, his fall showed how fragile such personal rule can be. When loyalty breaks and fear no longer holds, systems built around one man can collapse with extraordinary speed. After his death, Libya was left to face the heavy task of building something new without him, while still wrestling with the memories and consequences of his long tenure. The desert he came from remains, stretching quiet and indifferent beyond cities and roads, outlasting kings and colonels alike. Muammar Gaddafi's story is, in the end, a warning and a mystery. It is a warning about the dangers of unchecked power, the seduction of grand visions that ignore the need for accountability, and the damage that can be done when a leader believes he alone embodies the will of a nation. It is a mystery because it leaves behind questions without easy answers. How different might Libya have been if its oil wealth had been combined with stronger institutions and wider freedoms? Could a man who saw himself as both savior and father ever truly share power? For those who tell his story, one image often stands out. It is not the grand parades or the international summits, not the ornate uniforms or long speeches. It is the stark contrast between the young officer, full of certainty, announcing a bright new dawn for his people in 1969, and the old man, wounded and confused, pulled from a drainage pipe in 2011. Between those two moments lies the full weight of his life, and the fate of a country that rose and fractured under his rule. The boy in the tent, the colonel in the barracks, the brother leader in the palaces, the hunted man on a dusty roadside. They are all the same person. His story, told in a single sweep, is a story of ambition, belief, brutality, and the relentless, unforgiving passage of time.